So moving on, November, nearly at December. Number of new homes built hits a 30-year high. Yeah. 241,130 net additions. I actually think that's short of the target by about 60,000, I believe.
But it's positive, and as we say, driving around Oxfordshire, you see it. You cannot, in fact, driving beyond Oxfordshire, you see it. I mean, actually, I don't think you have to go very far at all to see a new homes development of some kind by some builder. I mean, I would argue perhaps people need to check the numbers and actually look at, the aspirations. I mean, they're talking about 1 million homes between Oxford and Cambridge. Yeah. I mean, there's a limit to any nation's capacity to build these places.
Hasn't someone suggested that this should be called the Cotswold National Park? Then?
Well,
so we start building. Sorry, Tim, I don't mean to upset you with that.
No, I'd support that. I'm in for building new homes. We need new homes. But what I don't really like is this intervention where we're forced to build so many so quickly, and a lot of them are sitting empty. Lots of developers around Witney are stopping building. They're moving builders to different sites
and the wrong types of property, perhaps. Yeah. Are we really thinking about the right type of property for an ageing nation? Yeah. I know bungalows bungalows have sort of almost got a stigma attached to it, but they were built for a reason. Yeah. And maybe we should just revisit, the stock that we're building. I mean, it seems to be predominantly 4 or 5 bedroom detached houses.
This is quite an interesting protest the other week in the Windrush Valley. The group went down to the houses at the bottom and actually handed over life jackets to the owners of the properties that were down there.
So when it floods?
Yeah, well, it did, didn't it?
Yeah. I think wellies would have been more appropriate than life jackets, but I get the point.
Yeah. Bit of good news though, house sales hit a high for 2019 in November, 4.2% up. Now I reckon probably most of that,
first time buyers,
14.4% was probably after the election.
Yeah.
Well, I read there was a lot of mortgage lending in November was pretty high, and a huge amount of it was to first time buyer mortgage lending. So again, it's government interference, so fine to a point, but you need to think about the upper end of the market as well. I don't think there's enough thought about helping people who don't want to be living in a 4 or 5 bedroom house any longer. Yeah. So there was rumours, and we've yet to have the budget in February or March or whenever it's going to be, and I think to me that's going to be a very interesting indicator as to where things are going. But the top end of the market is in gridlock, arguably, at the moment, because it's too expensive for a lot of people, particularly in their latter ages, who are healthy and fit to stay in their own home. But they don't want to fork out a load more stamp duty and the hassle that goes with with moving. But those houses are actually underutilised. So the overall market, I don't think the government are really thinking all the way through. It's very focused on first-time buyers. Something had to happen.
I completely agree. Yeah. Well, finishing off the year that was, the Queen's speech confirmed the Renters Reform Bill and the removal of Section 21, and a new lifetime deposit was introduced.
Well, that's the idea. So the idea of a lifetime deposit. And again, I think that's interesting. Again, government trying to think, making it easier for renting and going from one property to the next, which many people do in their, for many reasons. I think it's slightly flawed, but we haven't got time to talk about that now, per se. But I think it's important that we are actually, and I think this is a government that's actually they put a marker out that they're going to improve the home buying and selling process. They're going to improve the sales process. And actually, that's got to be good for all of us, whether we're inside the business or trying to sell a house or first-time renter. So I think it's positive overall that, we're just trying to improve things.
Yeah. And there's a bit of a public service announcement. Just remember that 500,000 households affected by Whirlpool are recalling their washing machines.
Pretty scary, that, actually.
Yeah.
It's a big number, isn't it?
So that's the year that was. So, biggest challenge facing estate agents and letting agents in 2020. I guess if you take letting and you take estate agents.
Okay, sales, after you.
Well, I think the biggest challenge is several, actually. I think keeping up with the compliance and legislation is, for letting agents and their landlords, got to be one of the biggest issues, because it's not going to stop just with the electrical safety. It's just been announced. Consumer power is going to sort of push that forward, and it's quite wrong that there's still an issue where you can actually list a property on Rightmove and Zoopla and without that property having been confirmed as being safe. You can drive a car that's been MOT'd, it's had 120 checks on it, and that's at least peace of mind when you buy that car. But if you're a first-time renter, do you know that those properties are safe on Rightmove or Zoopla at the moment? No, and I think we've got a long way to go. But my point is there's going to be a lot to do with compliance and keeping up with that, and for agents. I think the other thing is for the agents to find new landlords. We're under a situation at the moment where there's arguably anti-landlord strategy with the government. They don't really want to see lots of individual landlords. So for agents who run lettings businesses and management companies, where are they going to get their new clients from? So I think they've got to think about that. And then the perennial problem, the biggest challenge is going to be getting youngsters to want to come into to the profession of real estate. Now I've had a great time over 40 years of being involved as an estate agent and letting agent, and I'm still involved and I'm still enjoying it. But it's not arguably the first thing you think about at school, that you're going to become an estate agent, and you go to a careers convention or something. You probably arguably won't see an estate agency there in amongst Army, Navy, BMW, etc. So I think that's a big issue for the industry, because we're always going to want to sell our homes, we're always going to want to rent homes, and you've got to have people that want to do that. So it's a big issue, particularly in Oxfordshire, where zero unemployment, which is wonderful, but for getting people to and selling the idea that it's actually a very interesting and enjoyable job.
How would you do it?
I'd get estate agents licensed, and I'd have the licensing body promoting their business at maybe National Federation of Property Professionals at these stands, because I think we're an independent estate agent. We have 7 offices in Oxfordshire. It wouldn't really be possible for us to go to these national trade fairs and try and find people who want to come to work in Witney. But there must be a place for the NFOPP or similar to attend these shows and bring people in for the trade, and then pass names and phone numbers of companies that are looking. Maybe you could do it that way. So it becomes non-competitive. If you have 2 or 3 big corporate companies that attend because they've got the resources, then they'll probably take the best and put them their way and send the others out. But I think if you had an industry regulator that could attend these trade shows, we had, when I was at school, we had leaflets come round to the schools and the careers masters saying, have you thought about a career in a estate agency? That's how I got into the business. I wrote something on that form I shouldn't have written, and as a punishment, just after my A-levels, did my last A-level on a Wednesday, got sent for an interview as a punishment at an estate agent 40 miles away. That was my punishment interview practice. Really quite liked it. Went back on the Friday for a second interview. Saturday and Sunday moved out home into one of the flats above one of the company's offices. Monday started work as an estate agent.
Wow.
So that's proactive, bringing people in, and I've never looked back.
Well, maybe we need to look to some of these big corporations to try and help in improving the profile of agency. And companies like Rightmove and Zoopla are taking a lot of money out of estate agency. Maybe that's something that they could be adding.
Yeah, I think licensing will help. Hopefully it'll give the edge to the reputation. Needs to change. What
would you say is the biggest challenge?
I don't think there's only one big challenge facing our business. I think there's a few that we've got to just be mindful of. The first one I've just written down is oversupply. We carry these stats. We look at them at the moment. We think we're in that new norm. If homes continue to bundle onto the market, and even if the same number of homes get sold, the balance between supply and demand will shift, and that won't give people the confidence to buy. If prices start coming down too quickly, people will say, I'm just going to hold on and see where they level. And when they hold on, they come down still further, and that's what we've seen in the 2 or 3 property recessions I've seen in my lifetime. So I think oversupply we just need to be careful with. Negative press. We all talk about the self-fulfilling prophecy. If you hear in the press Brexit's bad, you're going to think Brexit's bad, and that's all you're going to talk about. If you hear houses aren't selling, if you hear house prices are crashing, you're not going to buy. So it does become a self-fulfilling prophecy. So negative press. Rising interest rates. I did a piece for the Financial Times quite a while back. I did, and I kept it. I framed it. That was my moment of fame, because everyone was talking about the relationship between income and house prices, and they had these 2D graphs that showed income going like this and house prices going like that, and people were saying houses are not affordable now because they've gone at this rate and salaries are that. I argued that it's not actually a 2D puzzle, it's a 3D puzzle, because you've got to factor into this interest rates. So if your salary stays the same and the house price stays the same but interest rates halve, arguably you could afford twice the size mortgage you could before. So it's definitely not 2D, 3D. My lifetime in the business, I've been used to interest rates on mortgages around about 10%. That's my norm. For the last few years, if you talk to anybody that's purchased over the last 5-10 years, they'd say if it goes above 3%, we couldn't afford it. So I think another factor for me would be interest rates. If they stay down, and I think they will, I think more people are voting to reduce rather than increase. So if they stay down, we'll be okay. But if interest rates suddenly rise for any reason, that could be a problem. Reliable and steady income, as we talked about with wages. I think in West Oxfordshire we have the highest percentage of state-employed people. So I think their jobs are relatively safe and not perhaps so susceptible or worried about the business going bust because they work for the government. So I think if we have that stability, but what I've always yearned for in my business is a week where we value 10 new homes, we list 5, we sell 3 and we move 2, and next week we do that, and I've been yearning for that. I've been yearning for a market where prices go up 3, 4, 5% a year and it's sustainable growth. But I think external interferences, be they government or wars or external interferences on the property market, are the things that make it boom and dive and crash and climb. So I think if we just imagine it like flying a glider, one of my old bosses said to me years and years ago that the property market is like flying a glider, in that when you're new, you get in there and you've got these sticks and you've got these pedals and trying to do all this stuff. Actually, if you just let it all go, it will right itself and it'll be fine, and then you can take control again. And I think just have a period where we just leave things be.
Our feedback is actually the biggest challenge is going to be survival, and mainly based on being able to control costs, which most agents seem to be being hit by costs that they can't control. And at the same time trying to generate sales. So the big costs would be things like advertising, like the portals and things like that, but also staff. So it comes back down to Frank's point again of staff. How are we going to get staff? How are we going to control the costs? Because there's only a limited number of staff out there. The only way you're going to attract them is by paying them more.
And I think making the jobs enjoyable, and I think there's an element certainly in the lettings and property management sector where the jobs are less enjoyable because it's just a nightmare keeping up with this constant, never-ending. It's like teachers must have felt for years, and police force and other. I'm sure when the government tweak and change things, just when you got the children up to a certain level of a certain O-level, GCSE, whatever, it suddenly changes. It's the same in our world. So I think you've got to make the job interesting. I think rents are going to rise probably more rapidly in the first part of the year because I think we've still got this sort of hiatus for taxation where landlords are dropping out of the market and maybe it suits them certain age and stage in their life. So at the moment there's no real incentive to do buy-to-let, and I can't see a lot more stock coming on the market. So I think rents are going to go up, and not least because we're still going through this phase where because of the tenant fee ban.
Last week's stat was 26% of landlords are thinking of selling at least one property.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's where agents need to give them advice, because I would say to people, before you do that, what are you going to do with the money? Now, if you've got a good reason for it. But also, we've got to educate landlords to keep that wealth in the family. There are many taxation strategies, and this is where I think accountants need to work with other partners, such as property managers need to work with accountants and other professionals, so that you work together collaboratively to actually give the consumer the right sort of advice. Because I don't believe everybody should just sell because the government have introduced this, that and the other, or whatever. Fine if it really is the last resort, you must, but it's very wrong, I think, for our industry just to roll over and say, oh yes, just sell, you should do that. We should give people the right advice.
Is this a yes, no, or can I have a maybe?
Have a maybe?
I'll go maybe for 2 reasons. One is the argument to say house prices will rise is because we've seen a little bit of offside this year, last year, 2019, and therefore there's room for growth. There's some real good bargains out there, and when they start to sell, people have to buy those that probably not been discounted so much, so that would push prices up a bit. If, though, we see this continuing rise in supply, even if the same amount of sales happen each month and each quarter, but it's off a bigger set of properties to choose from, that will push prices down a little bit. But I don't see any wholesale crash. I looked before I came here today at the amount of buyers we dealt with and the amount of sellers we dealt with last year that were needs-based versus wants-based. So what you have is people that actually do need to move, and you have people that, I'd like to buy over there one day. Around about 70% of the people we moved last year, sellers and buyers, were needs-based buyers, and therefore I think the transactional volume we've seen in historic times will continue. Will that be at prices higher or lower? Well, it depends on the amount of supply. So if the supply stays where it is, I think we're in for a level market. If supply falls and less homes become available, prices could rise.
Our feedback on sales does seem to be that the rocket fuel of buy-to-let has been turned off. There is some concern about interest rates floating around, and maybe that's Brexit related. So back to your glider, I think that with that removed, we might be in a point where the market will find its own level.
Yeah.
But I would say that'd be more like an ice age than a tsunami. It's not going to be a rapid correction. There's going to be just a very gradual settling.
I think.
And rents are again. Our research shows that you're exactly right, that there will be an increase.
Yeah.
In rents in the first quarter.
If you look at the steep rise in properties for sale over the last 3 years, 17, 18, 19, if you're seeing this, you might be able to see this. If not, then go with me. But the rise, the rate of climb of properties for sale over the last 12 months has definitely slowed. So we're not seeing year on year more and more. We're seeing a stabilisation. And if that stabilisation is the new norm and the balance between supply and demand stays at that level, what that will mean is that house prices will by and large will stay the same.
What would you do if you were the housing minister, Tim?
I would proceed with great caution. I think interference by government, interference by external factors, as I've already said, often has a negative impact and creates the outcome which is the opposite to what they've actually set out to achieve. So I would probably leave it alone. I know government take advice from property or industry specialists, but quite often they're people that are high up on boards of big companies and they're not at the coalface. So I think they should probably work with smaller groups of local people that know what's actually happening, because you can't introduce a law that's good for everybody based on the averages of the total market. So try and get into there nationally, try and fix the conveyancing progress, the program that we've already got through licensing, and make what we've got work, because that is a far quicker fix to the issues we've faced over the last 20-30 years than changing the legislation.
I would ask the Prime Minister to allow me to do the job for more than 6 months. We've had about 13 housing ministers in about the same amount of years or something. It's a crazy stat. So I would insist, unless I've done something wrong, I'm in it now for the term of government, as it were. So, because I think it's very wrong to have the head figure of person who's dealing with housing just to be coming and going. It doesn't, if you're serious about it, government should put somebody, in charge who is going to stick with it. I agree with Tim. It needs to look beyond the larger firms, beyond the big developers. It's not a job that I think anybody would relish because there's so many, complexities. Actually, that said, it's actually a really interesting role because, we're getting there. I think we are clearly building more homes. I wouldn't keep tweaking with all the legislation. I think we've got to say enough is enough. So I really would look at what Julie Rugger said and maybe have another think. It's quite major, but is that law currently fit for purpose? And I don't think it is. I think it's a very interesting role, not one I'd want, but I'd want to do it for a slightly longer period than most have done it in the last few years.
Yeah.